Think about the person that you trust most, a person that knows all of your secrets, who sees you when you're vulnerable and comforts and smiles. Now picture them sitting quietly across from you, nodding and laughing while secretly deciding how they're going to end your life. No break-ins, no warning, just betrayal all wrapped up in a familiar face. Because sometimes the last thing you see isn't the danger coming toward you, it's the person you thought would never hurt you. And once you realize the truth, well, it's already too late. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder, all things that I love to consume, and I know you do too. You sick, intellectually twisted, beautiful-minded freak. And today, we're getting into some night shy malending dong true crime twisted stories. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into these twisted true crime cases together. David Castor lived a life that most people would consider quite ordinary. He was born in Syracuse, New York in 1957, and David just had this overall steady presence, and he built his entire world around him with good old hard work. He owned his own heating and air conditioning business and was pretty successful with it. And he would fill his free time with outdoor activities like boating, snowmobiling, and anything to feel the cold wind come across his face. So all was well with David, but he was missing something in his life, and that was Stacy. And when he met Stacy, everything just felt right and whole. And like David's life, already being with Stacy just felt comfortable and practical because Stacy was really organized and reliable. David had a really regimented life and she fit perfectly into that. So Stacy basically had everything that seemed to complement the life David had already built for himself. So they would get hitched and marry in August of 2003. Now Stacy had two daughters from a previous relationship. So when they got hitched, he moved Stacy and her two daughters, Ashley and Bree, into his own life. Though it was not without friction, cause David had a life with no kids and not any sort of responsibility in that way. And now he had two teenagers that were, well, teenagers. So David's relationship with the girls was rocky to say the least. And like I said, David had a very regimented life, so when he became a new stepfather, he was pretty strict, demanding that they follow all of his rules without any sort of question. And as we know with teenagers, they don't really respond to that very well. It's like me when I was a kid with my stepdad. I would just be like, "You're not my dad." That was me slamming the door. Jay put in a door slam. But still, from the outside looking in, this family seemed pretty stable. You have a hard-working man like David and a very supportive wife like Stacy, and just this big blended family just trying to figure things out. But beneath the surface, a darker reality was starting to take shape. Because on August 22nd, 2005, 2 years after David and Stacy got married, Stacy would place a very frantic 911 call. David, she said, had locked himself in their bedroom after an argument and he wasn't answering. And when the police arrived, Sergeant Robert Willoughby knocked on the bedroom door, but nobody would answer. So he would bang louder and louder, but there was no response from David. So with nobody answering and him being worried that something's wrong with David, he would force himself in opening the door. And what he would find would look like David had just taken his own life. Because when he busted through the door and into the bedroom, he would find David just laying across the bed, sprawled out completely naked. And on the nightstand sat a glass of bright green liquid alongside a bottle of apricot brandy cranberry juice, and on the floor, an open container of antifreeze. And it was just lying there, almost like to casually. And after the sergeant broke in and examined the area, obviously Stacy came into the room and would see David's body sprawled across the bed. And Stacy would just be beside herself and collapse into hysterics. I mean, her brand new husband was now dead. So she would just be screaming and sobbing, just unable to control her emotions, and telling the officers that she didn't understand what happened. But she did say that he was very depressed and had been drinking very heavily recently. And the scene told the same story that Stacy was putting forth. There was no sign of any sort of struggle in the room, no bruises, no wounds, just a man and a drake. So an investigative team would be called and they would start combing through the bedroom. But as they were combing through the bedroom, they would start finding tiny inconsistencies. Naturally, they would test for fingerprints on the antifreeze glass, given that that's how they assumed he took his own life, but they couldn't find his fingerprints on the glass. And they also found that there weren't any of David's fingerprints on the antifreeze either. And the only fingerprints that they could find were Stacy's fingerprints. But it was her room, so they weren't thinking much of it yet. But then they found the turkey baster. Yes, the turkey baster. So while investigators were searching the rooms and the rest of the house, they would start digging through the kitchen's garbage. And investigators would find a turkey baster. And on the inside, they would see a substance, and they would find out that it was just sticky with antifreeze. And the tip was covered in David's DNA. And this just painted a horrifying picture. Someone had clearly taken this turkey baster and forced it into David's mouth, just force-feeding him poison until he passed. And investigators' suspicions were deepened when they looked into Stacy's past and found another husband. And her previous husband would be Michael Wallison. He actually died 5 years previous under mysterious circumstances. But his death was just written off as a heart attack at the time. And an autopsy was requested, but Stacy would deny it. Strange. And she would just say that she was satisfied with the doctor's heart attack diagnosis. I bet you were. In 2007, Stacy actually invited her oldest daughter, Ashley, to join her for drinks, and this would be an early celebration for her 21st birthday. So Stacy and her eldest daughter sat together just laughing and relaxing and talking. And then Ashley, naturally trusting her mother, drank what she was given. But 17 hours later, Ashley was found unconscious in her bed, and she would be discovered by her sister Bree. And beside Ashley would be a suicide note. And on the note, it would be just a long rambling confession taking blame for the murders of both Michael Wallace and David Castor. And Stacy would make another frantic call to the police. How old is your daughter? 20. Is she conscious? Yes. She's making noise. Is she breathing normally? No. An entire bottle of vodka. Ashley, is that her? Oh, she's throwing up? She left the letter. She left the letter. That's a no. Oh my God, this is not happening. And she was scared that her daughter had died, but her daughter hadn't actually died. Ashley luckily survived. And I'm lucky for Stacy. So when Ashley woke up in the hospital confused and terrified, she swore she had no memory of writing any such note. And forensic analysis later proved that that note had been typed up at the time when Ashley had been sitting in class miles away from the family computer. And the note also included mispronunciation for antifreeze as anti-free, which was noted earlier in the police interview. Girl's just giving herself up. So the truth was now unmistakable. Stacy Castor had poisoned her own daughter, trying to stage a suicide, and forged an entire confession, all to frame her eldest daughter for her other crimes. So given all this information, investigators would exhume Michael's body, Stacy's previously deceased husband. And forensic testing would uncover crystals of ethylene glycol, which is the chemical found in, let's all say it together, antifreeze. And it was preserved in his tissues. So 2 husbands, same woman, same poisoner. Needless to say, it wasn't a coincidence. It was a murder. So detectives set up surveillance on Stacy, tapped her phones, and watched her every move. And during a police interview, Stacy made a critical slip. She started to say she poured her husband the cranberry juice. How could you fuck that up, you dumb bitch? I'm glad you did, but... So it was a simple stumble, but in a murder investigation, it was like a gunshot. And they made note of this interesting mispronunciation. And in September of 2007, Stacy would be arrested. And at her trial in 2009, Stacy would actually stand in her own defense, and she would even claim innocence, just spinning stories, trying to sound out. But the evidence was just stacked against her, from the fingerprints to the turkey baster to the toxicology reports to the forged note. And it would take the jury less than 2 days to find her guilty. Thank God. And Stacy Castor would be sentenced to 51 years to life in prison. But this wouldn't be a sentence that she would ever complete, because in 2016, while serving her time at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, Stacy would die of a heart attack. And she would never confess, and she never apologized. She just slipped away the same way her husband's had, in the same way she almost claimed her own daughter. So the woman that everyone once saw as the perfect wife had been hiding in plain sight, a predator, a manipulator, a killer. And I say good riddance by waste of oxygen. And with that, let's move on to the next story. Travis Victor Alexander didn't have the type of childhood you'd expect from someone who would grow up to inspire people. He was born in 1977 in Riverside, California. And let's just say Travis's early life was rough the kind you survive and not live because his parents both struggled with severe addiction. So his home life was just utter chaos all the time. So by 11 years old, Travis just had enough and he would move in with his paternal grandparents. And throughout his childhood, he would just search for something his birth home just couldn't give him, which was stability. So it was in that new home, under the strict but loving care of his grandmother, that Travis found the things that would define him: ambition and faith. So eventually he would become a very devoted member to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And from there, he would just start to dream big and he would succeed at most things that he did. And by his early 20s, he was a rising star at prepaid legal services. So he was a part-time salesman and he was also a part-time motivational speaker, just pulling people left and right into his orbit with his sheer charisma. And people would say Travis was funny, ambitious, and charming, and that he always just wanted to make something of himself. So he would become very successful in his job. And one day he would have to go to a conference in Las Vegas, and this was in 2006. And at this conference he would meet Jodi Arias. And that's what his whole life turned upside down and everything changed. And Travis's close friends say that their chemistry was instant. Jodi was beautiful and magnetic and Travis was just hooked from the start. So right after that conference, they would start a long-distance relationship stretching between Mesa, Arizona, and Palm Desert, California. But eventually they didn't want to do long distance anymore, so she would move to Mesa to be closer to him. And Jodi would even go so far as to convert to Mormonism, and Travis himself would even baptize her. So they were in love and happy, but that wouldn't last forever and cracks would begin to show. Friends of Travis would notice how Jodi just clung to Travis all the time. She's very codependent. Not only was she codependent, she was also very jealous and very possessive of Travis. And Sky Hughes, one of Travis's closest friends, last remembered warning him, quote unquote, "I'm afraid we're gonna find you chopped up in her freezer." Oh, that's not good. It was just a joke at the time, but unfortunately, it wasn't a joke for too long. So their relationship would get a little rocky and they would kind of be off and on through the years, but they would never really sever ties. Even when they broke up, they would continuously keep talking and sleeping together. So it was almost like a friends with benefits situation when they weren't actually together. But it was at some point during this weird friends with benefits relationship thing that Jodi's behavior kind of went off the rails. She kept popping up uninvited and reading his emails and quite literally stalking him. And Travis's friends were terrified cause Travis was telling them what was happening, and they're like, "Run, what the fuck are you doing?" So Travis was just in the middle, here caught between guilt and affection, especially because Mormonism forbade premarital sex, but it couldn't seem to pull him away from Jodi. But no one, not even Travis, could have guessed just how far things would go. So on June 9th, 2008, after days of unanswered calls and missed meetings, Travis's friends broke into his home, cause they didn't know where he was, and the scene inside the home was their friend's worst nightmare. They would get into the house and they would see a blood trail that led to the master bedroom. So they would follow the blood trail into the master bedroom, and that's where they would find Travis slumped in a very awkward position in a pool of blood inside of his own shower. And at this point, he had been dead for days. So naturally, the friends would call the police. And when the police arrived, even seasoned investigators were shocked at the sheer violence of the whole scene because Travis had endured 27 stab wounds of throat, so deeply cut it was nearly severed, and a bullet wound to the head, just overkill beyond overkill. So whoever had done this wasn't just trying to kill Travis, they were trying to destroy him. And friends were obviously very quick to point fingers at Jodi. So they would tell police about Jodi's obsessive behavior, the break-ins, and the pure jealousy that was just constant in their relationship. But at the time, it just sounded too obvious because wasn't it always just the crazy ex? So police would tread carefully and open up an investigation carefully. So they would go on and examine the house, and they would actually find a damaged camera in Travis's washing machine. And they were actually able to recover photos from the camera. And the images that they would see from this camera were so disturbing cause the images would show Travis in the shower alive, and not just alive, but right before he was murdered in the shower. And through searching the house, DNA evidence would pop up as well. They would actually find a bloody palm print on the wall, and it would contain 2 DNA profiles. One was Travis's and the others was, you guessed it, Jodi's. and this would obviously be enough to bring her in. So investigators would bring Jody in and they would interview her. And when questioned, Jody just played it cool as a cucumber. First, she denied ever being there at all. And then, when pressed even further, Jody came out with the truth. She told them that masked intruders had actually broke into the house while she and Travis were there and killed Travis, but that ended up letting her go. And police were curious about this, but they were hesitant on buying it completely because the evidence was starting to stack up. So without any proof that intruders actually came into the house because they couldn't find footprints or other DNA evidence, that they would charge Jody with first-degree murder. And only after her arrest did the truth actually come out. And this is what actually happened June 4th, 2008. So Travis was in his house and Jody would show up unannounced and uninvited. But Travis would let her in nonetheless. And after talking for a bit, they would slip into old habits, having intercourse, laughing, and taking some photographs. And at around 5:20 to P's, Jody would pick up Travis's brand new camera and start taking pictures of him in the shower. And this would be that last photo that we would ever see of him alive. And something at this point had shifted. Maybe Travis said something that she didn't like, or maybe he told her that this was really the end of their relationship. But whatever it was, Jody completely snapped. And in a sudden explosion of violence, she attacked Travis with everything she had in her, stabbing him repeatedly. And Travis would naturally fight back, trying to get away, and he would leave those bloody handprints on the wall in the process. But she was relentless and animalistic. She would go on to slash his throat so deeply he was nearly decapitated. Then after he was almost dead, she would shoot him in the head as well. And afterward, in a panic, she would try to clean up this scene, deleting the photos and throwing the camera in the washing machine. And then she would get in her car and drive off to Utah for a work conference. And she would even go so far as to meet another man in Utah and take pictures smiling next to him just days later. And later, during interviews and in court, Jody would lie again and again, just changing her story constantly. And she would eventually change her story to self-defense. But the evidence told a completely different story. It was basically chalked up to cold-blooded, calculated revenge from a woman who couldn't let go. And she would eventually break down in court as the prosecutor recounted the details of the stabbing and slashing. And in 2013, after a sensational trial that gripped the nation, Jody Arias was found guilty of first-degree murder. Thank God. And she was sentenced to life in prison without parole in 2015. And Jody continues to serve her sentence to this day. But despite the verdict, people still love her for some fucked up reason, and she's even selling some artwork from behind bars. Let's take a look at that. This is so weird. I hate all of this. I hate it mostly cause she murdered a person, so I won't be buying, won't be purchasing. She would also appeal in October of 2019, but the original conviction was upheld. And in the end, Travis Alexander escaped his broken childhood only to be caught in a nightmare he never saw coming. And the person he once hoped to share his future with became the architect for his own violent end. Though there are many that maintain Travis was not as innocent as many versions of the story try to paint him. In a Reddit post, somebody actually claims that Travis wasn't who he claimed to be essentially, and you can read the post here if you want to. Wow. But either way, killing is wrong, and I don't think it's ever justified unless it really is in self-defense. Just a sad, horrible situation all around. But with that, let's move on to our last case. Betsy Fario was the kind of person you just don't forget. She was born on March 24th, 1916, and she was warm, bubbly, and a little scatterbrained, but who isn't, you know. She was a bit short on cash, but she was rich in laughter and in friendships. Betsy actually worked at a local gas station, which gave her the time to pursue her passions, cause Betsy actually ran her own DJ business called Party Starters, which is very fitting for a woman who could just light up any room with her smile. And Betsy also had a ton of hobbies. She loved to spend time outdoors. She loved to play tennis. She loved to go camping, and she also loved cards and board games. And to top it off, she met somebody that she fell in love with. And in 2000, she would marry Russ. And together they would raise their two beautiful daughters. And he would even utilize his computer expertise to help with her business. And he would actually create a computerized DJ playlist for Betsy. So they were able to live together, work together, and it was just a harmonious relationship. Life wasn't necessarily perfect, when is it, but it was good. But a decade would go by and things would start to change because Betsy would be diagnosed with breast cancer. And Betsy, being Betsy, didn't want to waste the time that she had left because she already lived life to the fullest. So she was going to do that when she was given the diagnosis. So she made plans for a celebration of life cruise with Russ, their daughters, and their friends. And in late 2011, before they took their cruise, the news actually got worse because her cancer had spread to her liver and the doctors told her the clock was ticking. So Betsy chose to take advantage of the time where the effects of treatment were minimal because once you start treatment for cancer, you just feel sick most of the time. So they would go on this cruise and she would laugh and have fun with her loved ones. And she would focus on memories and not endings. And there was one friend in particular who stepped up during Betsy's battle, and her name was Pam Hupp. And the two had actually met years earlier at a State Farm office, and they would just kind of hit it off and become friends. And after Betsy's diagnosis, Pam started driving her to her chemotherapy sessions. And Betsy was so grateful Pam was just helping out whenever she could and was just a very comforting presence and was just a loyal, steady friend. And obviously she had help from her husband and her daughters as well. So December 27th, 2011 felt ordinary enough. That morning, Betsy went to Sightman Cancer Center for her chemotherapy. And later that afternoon, Betsy would text Russ to say she didn't need a ride home because her friend Pam had offered to give her a ride instead. And at around 7 p.m. Pam had dropped Betsy off at her house in Troy, Missouri. And Russ, meanwhile, was at his usual Tuesday night game night with his friends, just laughing and snacking and watching movies. So Russ would finish up with his friends and then he would get into his car and head home. And supposedly he grabbed some fast food before arriving. And it was at around 9:40 p.m. that Russ would walk into the front door and his world would be shattered. Because Betsy was lying on the living room floor covered in blood and ice still protruding from her neck. And Russ, being completely frantic and horrified, would dial 911, just sobbing, telling the dispatcher it looked like his wife had killed herself because she had killed herself, and depressed about her cancer after all. So he didn't know why she would, but it was definitely a possibility because who else would do this to her? But when the police arrived, it was very clear to them that this wasn't a suicide. Betsy had been stabbed 55 times. So whoever had done this wasn't just trying to kill Betsy, they were trying to destroy her. And friends were obviously very quick to point fingers at Russ. So they would tell police about the life insurance money and the arguments. But at the time, it just seemed too obvious. So naturally, the investigators would zero in on Russ immediately. It was Betsy's husband. She had cancer. There was insurance money involved. It just made sense. Despite the fact that he had an airtight alibi cause he had witnesses cause he was at that game night that night, and he also had a time-stamped Arby's receipt from his stop on his way home. Police would barely look beyond him, and Russ would be detained just days later. They essentially just ignored the witness statements that he was with his friends the entire evening and ignored the alibi receipts. So Russ would go to trial and there would be numerous witnesses, one of which was Betsy's best friend Pam. And she would testify against Russ, painting a picture of an angry husband who wanted Betsy's life insurance money. And naturally, the jury bought it. And in 2013, Russ Faria was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Case closed, or so it seemed. Because 2 years later, cracks in the case started to show. New attorneys picked up Russ's appeal and uncovered staggering problems. Because they found evidence suggesting Betsy's life insurance had been changed just for days before her death. And the name of the sole new beneficiary, Pam Hupp, allegedly. They were just worried about how Russ would handle the funds, but they would find proof that Pam kept the entire $150,000 payout despite promising it would go to Betsy's daughters. And there were records of Pam showing that she was giving inconsistent stories about where she was that night, first claiming she never went inside Betsy's house at all and then admitting that she had. But it all pointed to one chilling direction, and that was Pam Hupp, not Russ, who was currently in jail. So in 2015, Russ was granted a new trial. And at this time, the truth unraveled very quickly. And without Pam's extremely misleading testimony and with clear evidence that he could never have been at the scene, Russ was thankfully acquitted. He would walk out of prison a free man. But for Pam Hupp, the walls were slowly closing in. And in 2016, Pam would make another move, one even more bizarre and horrifying. Pam would go on to lure a man named Louis Gumpenberger into her home. And Louis would have mental and physical disabilities from a car crash, but she would bring him in nonetheless under the pretense of being a Dateline producer, offering money for a reenactment, which is ironic given this whole case I believe was actually on Dateline, but I digress. But as we know, Pam was not a Dateline producer, and she would just shoot Louis in the head, and then she would claim self-defense. But police thankfully would quickly realize it was all bullshit and it was staged, and they would also find a hastily written note on his body, and it was clear that this was an attempt to create a fake kidnapping tied to Russ Farrier. So Pam would naturally be arrested, and when the arrest occurred, Pam would request to use the restroom. This woman has planned to be CDEFG. I swear to the Lord. Oh my God. So she would go to the restroom and then she would proceed to stab herself with a ballpoint pen in the neck and the wrists in an act described as consciousness of guilt. So glad you realized that you're a piece of shit and trying to take the easy way out. And after all that, she was still alive. She would even go on to get her mug shots with bandages around her neck and wrists. And moving on to trial, prosecutors would seek the death penalty for her. And she would initially plead not guilty, which like how? And later at her trial in June 2019, she entered an Alford plea. And this is where one pleads guilty to accept a plea bargain, but maintains that they're actually in fact innocent. Just the piece of shit plea basically because people only do this because they see the evidence stacked against them, and they know that they would be fucked, basically. So she would take the plea, but she would be sentenced to life in prison. Thank God. So the Alford plea basically just allowed her to avoid the death penalty. And in July of 2021, nearly a decade after Betsy's murder took place, Pam was officially charged of the first-degree murder of Betsy while she was already serving the sentence for the murder of Louis. And Pam's story garnered so much attention that it inspired a true crime drama called The Thing About Pam, which was an NBC limited series starring Renee Zellweger. That cover is crazy. I can't get over that cover. Oh my God, that is so scary. So Betsy spent her last day surrounded by friends she thought she could trust. And the person she trusted most, the one who drove her home that night, the one she believed was helping her this whole time, just turned out to be the one who betrayed her in the most brutal and unimaginable way. Pam Hupp wasn't just a friend, she was a killer in plain sight. So that concludes our 3 true crime stories. I'm just glad justice was served in all of these. They're all absolutely terrible, but I mean the most common thing is the people that are closest to you, so watch out. My heart goes out to the families involved, and I'm glad all these people are rotting in jail, hopefully thinking about what they've done every single day of their lives, and I hope it ruins them and haunts them constantly every second of the day. But anyway, I appreciate you all twerp. If you have any other cases you want me to check out, let me know down in the comments below. I always read your comments. I very much appreciate it, and be safe out there, alright. I will see you in the next one. Bye. It started with a message from an old name she hadn't heard in years. Unsettling at first, then threatening. And whoever this was knew things only someone watching her could know, and she sensed how this might tend. So, she documented everything and went to authorities, but what happened next would shock and horrify everyone. Crime, conspiracy, cults, serial killers, and murder, all things that I love to consume, and I know you do too. You sick, twisted, beautiful, intellectually minded freak. And today, we are hopping into a case with plot twist after plot twist. So without further ado, let's unbuckle our seatbelts, go Mach 5 down the highway, slam on the brakes, and bust through this windshield into this plot twist case together. Before we get into the video, let's talk about rent for a second. Alright, because if you're a renter, like so many of us are or have been, you know that writing that check every month is painful because it is probably your biggest expense, and normally you get absolutely nothing back for it. And that's where Bilt comes in. So for those of you who don't know, Bilt is the loyalty program for renters that actually rewards you for paying your rent. Every payment turns you points, and those points can be redeemed toward flights, hotels, light FT rides, Amazon, com purchases, fitness classes at places like Soul Cycle and Barry's, and so much more. And you can even put points towards your next rent payment or a down payment on a future home. Crystal Krug Rinsford was born in Boulder, Colorado on November 24th, 1980. She was raised by her parents, Lars and Linda Grimsrud, who saw that she demonstrated exceptional talents from a very young age. She loved the arts and nurturing her creative instincts, and she also excelled in school, particularly in math and science. In bonding with her father in early childhood, she worked closely with Lars consistently through hands-on projects. Because Lars was a retired aerospace engineer, she would spend countless hours working on classic cars with him in his garage, and it would be their sacred space together. We'd work on the cars, we'd race the cars. Crystal always felt very comfortable coming over here if we needed to talk or whatever. This is where we would sit and just enjoy each other's company, Lars would later recall. Their connection through the hobby brought their relationship very close together. As Linda described, Crystal loved to just get out and live life, and she grew up with an adventurous spirit that was well-rounded with her dedication to studies. She was equally at home performing dance routines on stage or at home reading chemistry books. The balance between her creativity and intelligence served her very well. Her excellence in maths and sciences earned Crystal an academic scholarship to the Colorado School of Mines, where she pursued a degree in biochemical engineering. She then transferred to the University of Colorado at Boulder, where she would finish that pursuit, graduating with a Bachelor of Science in Biochemical Engineering. Oh my God, she's really smart. Right alongside her academic achievements, Crystal was deeply passionate for dance and performing arts, as if she wasn't already impressive enough. She had graced many stages throughout her life, effortlessly impressing anyone that got the chance to see her beautiful performances. Her loved ones recall her ability to just light up a stage as well as any room she might enter. After graduating from college, she began a successful career at 19 years old at Adjuvant Technologies. She would work on the project management team and was well known for her creative energy and technical excellence. Colleagues would describe Crystal as a very valuable member to their project management team, so she clearly stood out in her field and made a bold impression. Even later on in life, in the midst of juggling a successful career and family, she encouraged her children to pursue artistic endeavors as well while maintaining her own creative hobbies. But before the success in family life with kids, shortly after high school and into the beginning of college, Crystal had her first serious boyfriend, and his name was Jack and Barney Holland. They dated for about a year, breaking up in the fall of 2000. Anthony had always been very friendly, very courteous. He always had good manners, which left a generally positive impression upon Crystal's family, as Linda would recall. But as time passed after their breakup, he periodically tried to come back into Crystal's life kind of out of the blue. He initially contacted her in 2002, and despite her apparent lack of interest, he didn't take the hint. He got in touch again in 2005 and 2010 via Facebook messages in an attempt to rekindle their love. Dude, back the fuck up. But he just wouldn't take no for an answer, regardless of how she consistently rejected his advances. He's like, we're meant to be together, she would later recall, describing how persistent he was. So by 2016, that persistence had begun to raise some alarm when he yet again reached out to Crystal. At this point, she firmly told him, "This is really creepy for me. We need to stop." She had finally had enough and decided to cut him off. To finally stop these advances, Crystal deleted her Facebook account, and it seemed to work for her. So finally, she had a bit of peace. In the mid-2000s, Crystal met Daniel Kruger, a respectable man who was building a career in government service. His stability and desire for a family drew her close to him, and the two fell in love. Crystal and Daniel seemingly had a really bright future ahead of them. Crystal continued to balance her engineering work and passions, and Dan worked for the state at the Department of Public Health and Environment in Glendale. Their relationship moved quickly, and by 2007, they were married and ready to start a family. Their 16-year marriage brought them 3 kids, and as of 2023, they were approximately 14 years old, 11 years old, and 8 years old. The family would settle into Broomfield, Colorado, where they were part of a comfortable, upscale community. Crystal was a very devoted mother, pouring her time and energy into her kids' happiness and well-being. She shared her love for the arts with her daughters and helped foster her son's growing interest in technology. Both her and Daniel worked hard at their jobs, and the family, both outwardly and inwardly, had built a loving home and life together with secure careers and well-adjusted kids. But after a while, Crystal and Daniel started to struggle a bit, and their marriage had begun to kind of fall apart. Daniel admitted that they were no longer sleeping in the same bedroom and had said he wanted to file for divorce. Crystal would confide in her family that she was kind of feeling the same way, so she had started looking into divorce attorneys and intended to seek full custody of the kids when she did. Despite their marital troubles, the two maintained appearances publicly and for the children, which was necessary for the situation they would find themselves caught up in. On October 2nd, 2023, Crystal received a strange text from Anthony on an unfamiliar number, Anthony being her old boyfriend that was super clingy and crazy. He said he'd be visiting the Boulder area and boldly asked if Crystal wanted to hook up. She was startled because it had been years since she had heard from him, and with her Facebook account no longer active, she thought she had put this chapter of her life behind her. Still having no desire to reconnect, Crystal ignored the message. The next day, she was hit with several more new messages, but their tone quickly escalated, reaching a hostile and vulgar level. Sensing that she was ignoring him, Anthony said, "You should kill yourself. Don't waste my time." Oh my God. This shift in seriousness greatly concerned Crystal. As Detective Andrew Martinez, who would soon look into this specific case, noted, "It's a pretty extreme reaction to not getting a response." Crystal was on edge because this first contact had been alarming. "He's never said this kind of stuff to me before," she later admitted. It felt as if she was suddenly targeted out of nowhere, and she now had a stalker. But the nightmare was only beginning. As weeks passed, the harassment only grew more intense. What started as an unwanted reconnection attempt had become a full-blown stalking campaign. Crystal began to receive what felt like an unending wave of concerning messages and emails, just steadily becoming more and more menacing by the day. Notably, the emails were coming from the address @hollandchicks Gmail. This led to them jokingly calling Anthony Kickman in an attempt to lighten the rather heavy situation. But still, threats became more pointed and not just towards her, but now also towards Daniel. One email warned, "I'll get rid of him and then we can be together." Another taunted, "You don't want him. I know you want me." Fears were heightened by Kickman's somehow intimate knowledge of their lives as one message read, "Saw you at dentist. See you sure." Oh my God, that's so fucking creepy. Crystal had actually just been to a dentist appointment, confirming that he had been watching her. In another instance, the stalker commented on the expired registration stickers on her license plate, further suggesting he was watching the vehicle. Disturbing photographs were soon sent showing Daniel getting out of his car at work. This just cemented that the stalker was fixated on both of them. Who knew if the children would be next? At this point, everybody was really on edge. Crystal now believed their entire family was under threat. Heading into November, she was exhausted and constantly looking over her shoulder. "It has definitely made me paranoid everywhere I go," she would later recall. Seemingly, there was something new every single day. The stalker was relentless, leaving her to fear that every corner presents some sort of danger, as Detective Martinez described. Kickman seemed to be everywhere and knew everything. But Crystal refused to just let this go without a fight. From early on, she took proactive steps to go against the stalker's crusade. To try to create some order from the chaos, she thoroughly logged each incident, creating a stalker log because she's insanely smart, including every relevant detail from her encounters with Kickman. After she received the photo of Daniel at work and a subsequent conversation with her father, Crystal went to the police on November 6th to share her findings. She met with Detective Martinez, who was assigned to her case, and recalled that she just kind of took over the interview room, laying out everything that had happened so far. Detective Martinez was very impressed by her record keeping. The stalker log included everything: dates, times, locations, follow-up points. Crystal did everything she could to express her fears while staying analytically grounded to explain the situation. "I keep trying to remind myself this is intending to be terrorizing. This is intending to scare me," she noted. Her proactive approach demonstrated the severity of the situation to law enforcement, and with her detailed files, authorities were now looking into the case. But even then, she wouldn't just sit back and wait. Ever determined to find her stalker, Crystal hired a private investigator as well, hoping to find where Anthony was. She and Daniel installed security cameras around the house to catch any suspicious behavior. She also decided to arm herself as the situation became more serious. Her father insisted that she carry one of his guns for protection. She was scared. I said, "Well, this sounds serious enough. You need to start carrying." "You'll use one of my guns for right now," Lars would recount. She earned a concealed carry permit and took firearm safety classes. Crystal was motivated to do everything she possibly could to keep her family safe, even in a time of extreme uncertainty. The stalker situation had soon taken over the whole household, and the Kruger family lived in constant fear and unease. They were all drawn into this as targets or collateral. Detective Martinez saw how spooked Daniel was, just like Crystal. The kids were now aware of what was going on, so it was very intense because an outside maniac threatened their very lives. The Broomfield police recognized this was more than just a routine stalking complaint, so they increased their vigilance. Patrols were heightened, and undercover officers kept watch on the home. The psychological stress on Crystal and Daniel was unfathomable. Texts and emails came at all hours of the day, so naturally they were jumpy and were required to be on constant alert. Daniel would recount, "I went to the grocery store briefly on Tuesday, and someone behind me dropped a can, and I fucking panicked. So, what am I doing? I'm panicking, and I'm doing a shit job of protecting my wife. So I'm not doing good." Their everyday lives were stripped of their normal routines and replaced with precautions. In late November, Crystal shared a very dark thought with her sister Jenna and brother Josh. She said she could feel a violent and approaching, saying, "It's either going to be me or him that's dead, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure it's not me." As Crystal desperately sought help, the official investigation struggled to progress because obtaining information from tech companies proved to be painstakingly slow. Detective Martinez was tasked with filing search warrants and subpoenas to get the necessary data on the phone numbers and emails that the stalker was using, such as IP addresses and account info. But weeks passed with no useful response. Sometimes these big tech companies will take their sweet-ass time or push back on providing requested information. Why? I don't know, because they're big asshole tech companies. Detective Martinez admitted that the necessary information was being slow-walked even as the stalking continued. By mid-November, Crystal's private investigator had discovered that Anthony was actually living in Eagle Mountain, Utah. She emphatically delivered the news to Detective Martinez, yet to her surprise, he chose not to contact Anthony directly at that point in time. He explained that ideally he wanted to have enough digital evidence and an arrest warrant in hand before confronting him. From his perspective, if they went to Anthony without the necessary proof, it could make the situation worse or cause him to flee. I explained to Crystal that we wanted to gather as much evidence as possible and ideally obtain an arrest warrant. So when law enforcement does go to Anthony's door, we can take him into custody and not have to walk away. With no arrest or identification of Kickman, Crystal grew more and more frustrated with authorities as December arrived. At this point, she was just feeling helpless and worried that the case may not have been the priority she once thought. She made the comment that she felt they had abandoned her, that they weren't doing things aggressively enough. Lars, her father, would later recall, waiting at the mercy of the bureaucracy was agonizing for her. Linda remembers that Crystal just broke down. It was just heartbreaking. She was just in tears. What am I gonna do? How am I going to live? She felt like time was just running out, and sadly, she would be right. December 14th began like any other Thursday for the Krugers. Crystal got the kids ready for the day as usual and went to drop off 2 of her 3 children to school. She returned just before 8. Saw Roam to get ready to start her own day. Daniel took the 3rd child to the bus stop before heading to work, so all appeared to be pretty normal. Mornings are very routine in this house, as Daniel later described. But on his commute to work, Daniel received a text message from Crystal asking if he could pick up one of the kids after school. He responded asking what time he needed to be there, but she didn't respond. He didn't think too much of it at first, but as he sent a few more texts throughout the morning, something was definitely off. It wasn't like her to go silent mid-conversation. Crystal's silence had become legitimately worrisome to Daniel. At around noon, he tried calling her but got no answer. His concern reached the point that he was compelled to call the Broomfield Police Department's non-emergency line and request a welfare check on her. His voice appeared very anxious but focused on the recorded call. "I don't think this is an emergency, but this feels really weird. My wife isn't responding to text messages or phone calls." Officer John O'Hare was dispatched to the Kruger household, arriving at approximately 12:28 p.m. He knocked on the front door, but no one answered, leading him to have a look around the premises. As he peered into the garage window, he saw a horrifying sight. A woman was lying on the garage floor, apparently lifeless, with visible head injuries. 151. Send medical. I got a female down in the garage. O'Hare urgently reported in, requesting backup and medical assistance. When they got there, they would for Centrion discover it was indeed Crystal. Unfortunately, she would have no pulse and had blunt first trauma and a stab wound on her chest. She would be pronounced dead at 12:43 p.m. Police taped off the house, cause it was now a crime scene. Upon hearing the news that something was wrong at the home, Daniel left work and raced back to get there. When he arrived, police informed him that his wife had been found dead, and he would collapse in utter pain, crying uncontrollably in the driveway as responders held him back from the scene. Victim advocate Heather Eates describes, "It's a weird feeling standing there when somebody's being told, 'I'm sorry, but your loved one has died.'" She guided him to the patrol car and comforted him by rubbing his back. Through his tears, Daniel's first clear concern was for his kids. In the car, he was very focused on the kids. He was very adamant about wanting to be the one to tell his children. Amidst the chaos and confusion, he insisted that he had to be the one to tell the kids what had happened. Authorities took Daniel down to the station, both for his own comfort and also to gather whatever information could help to catch the killer. This man has been going through a stalking case with his wife, and now she is gone. It appeared that Kick Man had finally made good on his threats and took Crystal out once and for all. Once Daniel had calmed down, they spoke to him for his statement. He described the routine morning that got the kids to school. She seemed fine when he left for work, and he told of the text message she sent him and how odd it was that she never responded. Eventually, that led to the welfare check call. Though distraught, he cooperated in every way he could, answering questions and providing ideas as to what may have happened. They said that Crystal was a fighter and she had to have struggled with the intruder. He just simply seemed to be trying to pick up the pieces that remained from this awful outcome. With Crystal deceased and the known history of a stalking ex, authorities immediately focused on locating Anthony. Detective Martinez later admitted, "My initial assumption was that Anthony Holland had gone to her home and murdered her. Broomfield police contacted authorities in Utah to find and bring Anthony in for questioning. That afternoon, Eagle Mountain Police showed up at his doorstep. He was at home watching TV when he heard several bangs on his front door. He opened it to find 8 officers standing before him. They immediately treated him as a suspect, asking him, "Have you ever heard of Crystal Crubb?" He admitted that she was his very first girlfriend ever. The officers didn't reveal why they were there, but Anthony thought they were going to arrest him. "I honestly thought I was going to jail for something." But he would say that he didn't know for what on this charge. They continued asking where he had been that day and if he could prove his whereabouts. Unfortunately for the theory, he had an alibi. Only a few hours earlier, he had been shopping at a Kohl's near his home. He had a receipt showing a timestamp of 12:16 p.m. on December 14th for a green sweatshirt. "What did you buy?" "A sweatshirt. This one right here." The purchase was made at 12:16 p.m. and with Crystal's murder taking place around 8. During that morning, there was no way that Anthony could have killed her and made the 8-hour return trip back to Utah by noon. He went even further to provide employment records verifying that he had still been clocking in for work during the alleged stalking time frame. After police cross-checked the claims, they told him he was free to go and wished him a better day. Though great news for Anthony, It left several unanswered questions for the situation back in Broomfield. It was back to square one now. Now that their prime suspect for months, including the stalker, had been eliminated, Broomfield authorities had to pivot quickly. Investigators wasted no time gathering any forensic and digital evidence that they did. While examining the house, they discovered that several of the home cameras had been turned off, and one had been covered with blue masking tape. This led them to check in with the neighbors in hopes that nearby cameras may have caught something. Since this case had turned into a homicide, Detective Randy P.E.L. Lick, a digital forensic examiner, was able to fast-track the request previously made by Detective Martinez to tech companies for information on the accounts in question. Despite being so slow before, they were magically able to provide all of the desired information within an hour. Starting to think this could have saved her life if they worked quicker before, but who's to say? The first big break was with the email records. The IP log showed that 2 of the email accounts used to her Ask Crystal were sent from the same IP address, and that address was the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. Both came back to the same IP address, and that IP address was none other than Annual's workplace, her husband's workplace. One of the email accounts had even been created on a secure network at the department. This discovery hit the investigative team hard unexpectedly. They were now faced with the possibility that Crystal's stalker may already be sitting right in front of them. Detectives confronted Daniel in the interrogation room, where he had been sitting for a bit now. "Who do you think killed her?" Still clinging to his original theory, he replied, "I think it was him. I think it's Anthony." When they told him that Anthony had an airtight alibi and could not have been the killer or person sending the messages, he was stunned. "I have nothing. I'm terrified to bring my children home." "What are you terrified of, Ida?" If it wasn't Anthony, and the real killer were still out there, then he still feared for the lives of his remaining family. At this point, detectives observed that Daniel's body language dramatically changed as he went from his former slouched-over, depressive posture to a defensive posture. He sat back in the couch a little bit. He crossed his arms, kind of like I have nothing to explain. In a moment, he had transformed from sorrowful to on guard. Detective Jennifer King Sullivan noted that as soon as suspicion seemed to creep towards him, he became careful and unemotional. She imagined Dan's head spinning, thinking about what else they were going to find. Did Daniel know more than he was letting on? Detective King Sullivan asked, "If you were watching these facts unfold in front of you in a movie, what would you say happened?" "There has to be somewhat." His evasive answer did little to convince them, but they still needed more, and they'd have to let him go until they could get it. As the digital evidence was poured over, more and more incriminating details were discovered. Financial records showed that several burner phones had been purchased with a Visa card, and that card was traced and registered under Daniel Kruger. Furthermore, the location data from one of those disposable phones showed that it had been present in the same locations directly alongside Daniel's personal cell phone, multiple times. Guys, a fucking idiot, thank God, though. The forensic tech team also examined the stalker photo of Daniel in his work parking lot that was sent to Crystal. After a much closer look, it was determined that the photo had actually been taken by a phone that was in selfie mode using a timer. Guy was taking selfies of himself in a parking lot. Oh my God, the phone had just been propped up on the back of his car next to his, and Daniel had taken it himself to make it seem like someone was watching him, which is kind of insane in and of itself. Looking at the photo itself, in hindsight, it seems so obvious, but I digress. After digging into the home security logs, they discovered that Crystal's phone had been used to disable the system at 8:00 a.m. The team at the house determined that the blue masking tape used to cover the Ring doorbell camera had originated from the Krugers' kitchen. Guy couldn't even buy masking tape, I guess. Next, they discovered that the suspicious text messages sent from Crystal's phone that morning had actually been scheduled ahead of time. I swear these guys are so fucking stupid. Crystal's phone data showed that messages had been drafted and sent on a delay timer to send later in the morning. P.L. Lick explained, "We believe Crystal was already deceased by the time that they were sent." At least 3 messages went out from Crystal's phone in this way. The one to Daniel asking about picking up the kids, and then one each to Crystal's father and or brother, and to Detective Martinez. The messages appeared to be a way for Daniel to give himself an alibi as they were sent after 8:00 a.m. when he had already left the house. Daniel's movements that morning were also suspicious. Neighborhood camera footage saw him leaving his house at 8:00 a.m., which was about 30 minutes later than he normally did. In addition to disabling and disrupting the cameras at his home, he manually deactivated his car's dash cam on the way to work, where he would arrive around 9:00 a.m. Last but certainly not least, Daniel's search history revealed that he had asked Google some particularly concerning questions. Internet searches like, what happens when you're knocked unconscious? Do people really go unconscious when hit in the head? How hard for head trauma to go unconscious? And how hard for head trauma to go unconscious? Do I kill my wife and get away with it? Just kidding, that last one was me, but might as well be. Like, this guy is scum. Stupid ass scum. Oh my god. I feel so bad for Crystal and her kids and her family and stuff. I just can't believe the audacity of this fucking idiot. Obviously, these Google questions aren't criminal on their own, but in the context of the current situation, it doesn't look too good for Daniel. As the prosecution would later highlight, all searches were the day before the murder. It was rather damning. Daniel had essentially researched the exact way that Crystal would end up dead the next morning. The fact that these questions were searched the night before demonstrated proof of premeditation, aka first-degree murder. Let's take a brief moment to talk about something that means a lot to me, and that is sleep and how I had no idea my pillowcase was sabotaging that. There's plenty of times where I've woken up sweaty, with my hair frizzy and sleep creases in my face, and my skin just looking tired. But when I switched to Bliss Y, I noticed the difference immediately. For those of you who don't know, Bliss Y is a pillowcase made from 100% pure mulberry silk. We're talking the highest quality, 22 mm, 6A grade silk. It's not just fancy for the sake of being fancy. Silk is naturally cooling, breathable, and hypoallergenic, which means it's way gentler on your skin and hair than cotton or even satin. Within days, my hair was smoother, less frizzy, and my blowouts and my curls actually lasted, and that's saying a lot from a girl with very fine, pin-straight hair naturally. Also, I have very temperamental skin, and I have found that I've had fewer breakouts since using the Bliss White pillowcases. It's dermatologist tested and recommended for a reason. I also love that it's fully machine washable because I'm not about to hand wash anything, ever. They have over 100 colors now, so there's a pillowcase for everyone. There's a reason Bliss Y has sold over 3 million pillowcases and has been featured in Vogue, Oprah Daily, and Good Morning America. It's because it works. Because you're a listener. Bliss Y is offering 60 nights risk-free plus an additional 30% off when you shop at Bliss Y. KallMeKris. That's BLISS. Y-S. KallMeKris and use code KEM to get an additional 30% off. Your skin and hair will thank you. It is the only pillowcase that is allowed in my house now. But thank you so much to Bliss Y for sponsoring this video and supporting the channel. And let's get back to it. Just 2 days after Crystal's murder, on December 16th, Broomfield detectives felt that they had enough evidence to move against Daniel. They quietly acquired a warrant for his arrest, charging him with the murder and related stalking of his wife, Crystal. Given the rather elaborate means of deception that he had pulled off up to this point, authorities were cautious to keep him from fleeing or harming himself once he realized that they truly knew it was him. That day, a team of officers surveilled Daniel's movements with around 8 marked cars. Eventually, he went to a local grocery store where the team followed his vehicle into the parking lot. They felt that this was their shot. We wait for him to park. We quickly converge on his car, Detective King Sullivan would later recount. Officers with guns drawn ordered Daniel to step out of his car. He was completely caught by surprise. They would pull him out and handcuff him on the spot, placing him under arrest for the murder of Crystal. Bystanders would watch in shock as this seemingly ordinary man was dragged away by police. But Detective Martinez confronts Daniel with a final question. Do you want me to tell your kids that you killed their mother, or do you want somebody else to? Listen, in the most respectful way, That man is a hero. Detective Martinez, that is a movie moment. Fuck you into this monster's face. I appreciate Detective Martinez so much for saying that. Just a punch right in the gut after Daniel's adamant demanding that he be the one to tell the kids of Crystal's death. Daniel did not answer the question. Shocking. Instead saying he wanted to talk with his lawyer, and then went silent. Daniel Kruger was now in custody and accused of being Crystal's stalker and Crystal's killer. Once Daniel had been arrested, detectives and prosecutors worked to lay out the full story they had uncovered. It was abundantly clear that Daniel had orchestrated the entire stalking campaign against Crystal. He secretly posed as Anthony Holland starting in early October of 2023, sending those texts and emails through burner phones and fake accounts. Every threat from Kickman had come from the man living in Crystal's own house, likely even taunting her from the same room at times. But why? What possessed him to do something so awful to the people he cared about? Investigators believe his motive was born from desperation and a desire to control the situation slowly slipping from his hands. Crystal wanted a divorce, and Daniel couldn't live with that. So, he created a plan to terrorize her into staying with him. He had hoped that by pretending to be a menacing ex, Crystal would fear for her life and need to lean on him for support and protection, thus reconsidering her desire to leave him. Just a pathetic attempt. As the prosecution later put it, Daniel decided to play puppet master to win her back. It was an insanely elaborate way to gaslight and control Crystal. For weeks, the plan played out, but not the way that Daniel had hoped. Instead of leaning on him, Crystal remained guarded and even suspicious, at one point saying to Daniel, "I can't rule you out as the stalker." This, added on with authorities closing in on the truth of the stalker's identity, made Daniel realize his time was almost up. Once he had become convinced that Crystal was truly going to leave him, and further that he feared he could be exposed as the stalker, he chose to end her life instead. She was putting the pieces together, and he was running out of time, said Senior Doc 8 Armstrong. Basically, if he couldn't have her, then nobody else could Days. Daniel finalized his plan on the evening of December 13th, as seen from his Google searches. The following morning, he went about the usual routine, pretending everything was normal as Crystal left to take the kids to school. At some point, he took one of his daughters to the bus stop, and when Crystal returned and pulled into the garage around 8, Sarawam, he was waiting for her. He struck her in the head with a blunt object, giving her 2 or 3 skull fractures and rendering her unconscious, or at least defenseless. Then he stabbed her above the heart, which would kill her. Daniel proceeded to stage the aftermath of the crime scene. He would disable the cameras, he would cover up the Ring doorbell camera, and he prepped the drafted texts for his alibi. Then he cleaned up and left for work like nothing happened, like the monster that he is. He then periodically texted and then called Crystal's phone to further support his shitty alibi. But all in all, Daniel just desired to own Crystal, and when she tried to break free, he chose to destroy her rather than let her life. As Brian Mason would later say, in planning on executing this horrific crime, Daniel Kruger terrorized his wife, his children, and an innocent man, all in order to control and then murder a woman who no longer wanted to be with him. She paid for his insecurity with her life. But she actually wasn't the first one to suffer from his tactics. As investigators took a deeper look into Daniel's past, they discovered that this was not the only time that he had stalked a partner. A former girlfriend of Daniel's came forward with her story. When she broke up with Daniel in the 1990s, he employed tactics that eerily matched the tactics used against Crystal. As authorities noted, he allegedly created fake online person as to send her harassing messages. This went on for months. Unfortunately, she was never actually physically harmed, and thus Daniel wasn't criminally charged. But her account established a pattern of obsessive, controlling behavior that seemed to be established well before he even met Crystal. It looked like Daniel had this dark tendency all along, hidden underneath his otherwise normal appearance. Daniel was formally charged with multiple felonies, including first-degree murder, 2 counts of stalking, and criminal impersonation. Each charge was, of course, very serious, with the murder charge alone carrying a life sentence. He would plead not guilty to all counts, like the fucking idiot he is, saying he was falsely accused and sticking to as someone else must have done its story. But by April 2025, it was time for the trial by jury in Broomfield County District Court. During the trial, the defense pointed to the lack of direct physical evidence in an attempt to sound out because there were technically no fingerprints or DNA of Daniels that were conclusively found at the murder or even on Crystal's body. Furthermore, the murder weapons, the blunt object and the sharp object, were never recovered, which the defense claimed was another factor supporting an unknown assailant. The defense also pointed out that there was a partial DNA profile from the crime that did not match Daniels, and none of Daniels' blood was found on his clothing or in his car or anywhere associated with the crime. There is absolutely no physical evidence on Mr. Kruger's clothing. There's no blood found on the car inside or out. It's searched 3 times, defense attorney Philip G. Igel argued to the jury. His daughter even confirmed that the clothes he wore later on were the same that he had dropped her off with at the bus that morning. The defense continued by attacking the police investigation, claiming it to be sloppy. Defense lawyer Joe Morales even went so far as to label Detective Martinez as lazy and incompetent, arguing that the whole thing was mishandled from the get-go. He noted that police didn't fingerprint Crystal's phone to confirm the scheduled texts, and without the forensic proof, they could never be 100% sure, just glazing over all the IP address stuff, but okay. The prosecution, on the other hand, led by Deputy DAs Stephanie Fritz and Kate Armstrong, introduced the mountain of digital and circumstantial evidence tying Daniel to the crime piece by piece. They took the jury through the whole story, Daniel's motives, desperation for control, the fake emails tied to his IP at work, the burner phones following his phone, and the gift card in his name used to purchase them, and the staged selfie on a timer, which is so embarrassing, and the security system being disabled from Crystal's phone, and the delayed text to establish his own alibi, his Google searches from the night before. They even had Daniel's former girlfriend testify to the stalking that she endured, showing that this was his character and not a one-off scenario. All the points laid out in such a fashion painted a pretty clear picture, and not one that was in favor of dumb-ass Daniel. The trial would last a little over 2 weeks, and finally it was time for the jury to deliberate. They did so for about a day and a half, returning with a verdict on April 17, 2025. The jury for person stood before the court, and Daniel Kruger was found guilty on all counts. Please rise for the jury. We the jury find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree. We the jury find the defendant guilty of count No. 2, stalking, extreme emotional distress. Guilty, 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 guilty. At that point, I think I started breathing again, and other family members and attendants shared the sentiment. When they were interviewed later, the jurors said the digital evidence was so overwhelming that they had no doubt he was guilty. Broomfield Chief of Police, Enia Hempelman, praised the investigative team and expressed gratitude to the jury, saying, "I'm extremely pleased with the verdict and proud of everyone who came together to make this trial a success." Jurors agreed. The evidence and testimony against Daniel Kruger was both conclusive and damning. While we know it will bring Crystal back to her family and friends, we hope it closes a painful chapter in their lives. Though it indeed would not bring Crystal back, her mother Linda spoke of how at least life can go on now. Every day is a difficult day. You wake up and you feel the pain, and then you just try to go on with your day. Now given a first-degree murder conviction, Daniel faced a life sentence in prison. On April 18th, Judge Priscilla Lowe officially sentenced Daniel to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 9.5 years for the stalking and criminal impersonation to be served consecutively. So Daniel would never be free again. He was 44 years old at sentencing, meaning he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. But that didn't stop Daniel from continuing to proclaim his innocence. He even wrote to ABC's 2020 FS, insisting that he will fight this wrongful conviction on appeal. He was simply a man unjustly accused, and he played the part well. On recorded calls from his time in jail after the verdict, he was heard complaining that the prosecution never produced a single piece of hard evidence against him and that his family needed to stick by him because the real killer was still out there somewhere. He would plead for sympathy, sounding depressed more often than not, desperate for anyone to side with him as he suffered. Eventually, Daniel's brother Jeremy confronted him on one of the calls, saying, "Support is dwindling, you know. Mom and Dad won't believe you very much. I want to believe you very much." There's a lot that's come out, and as imaginative as I can be with finding explanations on ways to theorize how that, this or that could have been the reality, some of it is beyond even my creativity. His own family was unable to reconcile what he did when faced with the evidence. I think that says enough. In the end, Daniel had resorted back to the pattern of lying to his loved ones, just as he had lied to everyone else. Daniel remains imprisoned at the Sterling Correctional Facility in Colorado. Thank God. In the wake of Crystal's death, a number of glaring failures were exposed in the system, especially the delay in response from tech companies when they received the stalking warrants. Her family, spearheaded by her cousin Becky Ivanov, decided to channel their grief into pushing for change. Becky is a former domestic violence prosecutor and has teamed up with Oregon Representative Kevin Mannix to propose Crystal's Law. The law aims to protect victims of stalking and domestic violence by speeding up the process in which tech and communication companies work with law enforcement during such cases. It would force these tech and communication companies to provide requested info from search warrants related to stalking or domestic violence cases within 48 hours because in these sorts of cases, time is critical as any delay could cost a life, as in Crystal's case. Becky has been extremely vocal about this issue, firmly believing that Crystal's murder would have been prevented had the information been provided sooner. I absolutely believe that Crystal would be alive today because law enforcement would have had the information necessary to arrest her perpetrator, and she could have made a safety plan for herself to ensure that she was protected. This is further supported by the fact that some information from the warrants was not returned until after her death, despite being requested weeks before the murder occurred. Somehow, the process that had taken a significant amount of time miraculously was expedited within the hour once the situation had escalated to murder. So this should have been done much sooner. Rep. Mannix, alongside Becky, had announced that he is formally introducing Crystal's Law in the Oregon State Legislature this month, which is January 2026. In addition to compelling companies to act within the 48-hour window, they will also receive civil protection in those circumstances in an effort to remove any reason that those companies would delay in providing the requested information. They hope that Oregon will be the first to implement the law, setting the precedent for other states to follow or even reaching the federal level. Becky says Crystal did everything right. The system operated as it's currently designed, and she still got killed. So, this legislation is a way to remember and honor Crystal and works to ensure that a situation like this never happens again to anyone else. I think the work they're doing is absolutely amazing and absolutely honors Crystal. One of the most devastating parts of the story is that 3 children were left without parents, their mother being killed by their father, and their father now being in jail for life and their mother being deceased. Daniel took everything away from them. After Daniel's arrest, they were taken in by a relative and are being raised by family members who love them. Members of the community have also rallied together in their support. A local couple even contacted Crystal's relatives to ask if they could raise money to renovate their bedrooms, as they currently were staying in offices and gym spaces. They got approval, and the kids were ecstatic. So they started a GoFundMe to build each kid's dream bedroom. Another GoFundMe was also started for the kids as a way to help their daily lives and has since raised over $60,000. All the proceeds from this video will be going to that fundraiser, and I will also link it down below if you can at all afford to give anything away to this family to help support those children. These endeavors aim to give the kids some comfort and a fresh start. Their grandfather Lars has found solace in the loss of his daughter through sharing his passion for cars, as he once did with Crystal. He brings the kids into his garage workshop, teaching them to work on those classics just as she did when she was young. They run that same electric screwdriver and can tear a carburetor apart, Lars would say, reflecting on just how much Crystal would have loved to see it. They honor her memory that way. So that is that for the Crystal Krug case. My heart, as always goes out to the family. Again, if you want to donate to the GoFundMe, I'll link that down below. The proceeds from this video will be going to that GoFundMe 100%. I will also be donating on top of that. And yeah, just stay safe out there. I appreciate you guys and I will see you in the next one. Alright, bye.